The first and still foremost communications system is the analog phone network. But the growth of digital information, bits for everything, means much more than speech can be carried. Firstly, we'll be looking at examples of bits for everything, from internet publishing to cartoon animations. In the second half of the programme, we examine the commercial possibilities of digital cash, now running as a trial project in a British city. Specialist computer magazine publishers, such as Future Publications of Bath, prosper by spotting public interest early and catering for the niche market. A first glance around the editorial areas of several magazines shows the heavy reliance on computers in the publishing world. Timescales are short and people are few. The public's taste is a fickle one. The electronics home computer readership has suddenly switched on to a new interest, the internet.
Net Magazine's readers are typically people who are interested in the internet. Either they are getting ready to get online, to get involved with the online world, or they are actually on the internet and cruising about using their modem, their computer. We explain in plain English what people need to get on the internet in terms of computer hardware, and also what they can do when they're there. Because after all, computers are dull. It's what you can do with the internet that counts. And we explain where they can go, what they can do, and what to expect when they're actually online.
As well as the expected word processing, design and page layout are done on the editorial computer network, using a program known as Quark Express. Apart from the text, illustrations and photos are held in digital form. The final page image is output directly onto film for use by the printers. Data communications are obviously vital.
We couldn't do Net Magazine without, obviously, the internet or without our local Macintosh network here. All of Future Publishing's magazines are produced on Quark Express on Apple Macs, and so we share files over a local area network. And also, on the Internet magazine now, I commission about 90% of the features over email, and then those features are then submitted over email as well. So all the text of the magazine is generated electronically. And also people can take screenshots of the internet sites that then emailed to me as well, and then they are cut and pasted into the Quark Express documents. So really 100% through and through we use computers to produce the magazine.
Practicing what they preach, Net Magazine also publish electronically through what's known as a worldwide website, a set of interlinked pages with text and graphics, accessible to anyone in the world who can connect to the internet.
Presently, every week we're serving something in the region of 1.2 million file requests to 54,000 odd unique hosts or individual computers. Overall growth this year has been approximately 25% a month. And it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. In fact, it seems to be speeding up. It's a good way of getting your publications known all around the world. The nature of the World Wide Web, the internet, is that it's not just a localized phenomenon. It delivers your message across the planet. And because our magazines are feasibly relevant to people in all kinds of other countries, it's a good way for us to be able to present some content and so promote our titles overseas.
So where's the future for the paper-based magazine?
When we started Net Magazine, people said, oh, you can't do a magazine about the internet, it's a contradiction in terms. But the magazine beats computers every time for the sort of speed and ease of delivery. There isn't a computer that weighs about a pound and can have 100 pages of it. And when you download a file from the internet, it might take you a couple of minutes. But if that page of information is already in a magazine, then it's there instantly. So the magazine has a lot of benefits, but equally, we can benefit from the internet. The internet gives us a global audience, so people all around the world find out about the magazine when they wouldn't otherwise normally have done. And also we can publish extra information on the internet that we couldn't fit in the magazine, so the readers get an extra benefit from that.
Where did the electronic side of the magazine think the future would lie?
As the bandwidth of the telecommunications infrastructure expands, we're looking at being able to serve video and audio, real-time digital streaming of audio and video data, and that will add a lot of content and a lot of interest. It's a kind of convergence of media thing, I suppose. Eventually, we're not just going to be magazine publishers or republishers on the web. We might well be a whole multimedia operation.
Digital information isn't just text. Increasing computer power at lower cost means that new uses are found in traditional areas.
I mean, traditionally people have always used pencils. Pencils are a great medium. I'd never like to give them away. They never crash. You don't have to plug them in. They're not affected by power cuts. And they're simple and they're cheap. And it's very difficult to convince anybody that they should swap a pencil for $60,000 worth of expensive computer hardware. And in fact, that's not the way it works.
Philip Pepper began as a traditional animator, but he's now familiar with the digital methods that are replacing some of the processors.
The information that's on the paper, the lines, need to be transferred onto another medium. Traditionally that has been transferring it onto clear cell so that several drawings can be placed together. I have a cell here. This is a typical cell from an animated cartoon. You can see here that it's painted with very bright colours and that the drawing has been transferred to the cell, in this case using the old style, that the lines that you can see on the drawing have been traced onto the cell using a dip pen. So once that is done, the cell is painted with what we call cell paint, which is like not dissimilar to the sort of stuff you put on your walls. And it's painted onto the reverse side of the cell. So you can see here that the paint is rather quite blobby and obvious. But when that is turned over, it looks very neat and clean and sharp, and the colour is at its brightest.
Instead of painting and photographing each individual cell, 25 a second, to create the illusion of movement, the computer system takes over after the line drawing stage.
Okay, here I'm just adding colour to the drawings. The drawings have been scanned in already and now they're presented to me and I can quickly drop in colour. So this is the equivalent of somebody who's sitting there with a paintbrush and a pot of paint and putting colour into a cell. Of course the character may be more complex than the one we just looked at. Then this one here is unpainted and I can use some automation to paint the new drawing in relation to the old one. It's done a fairly good job, as you can see, but just missed out on a couple of little areas there that are shown to us with the black. So if I use another tool I have here, that will then fill those in correctly for me as well, and I can now go to the next drawing. And so this has become a fairly straightforward button pushing type of operation, and checking as I go along to make sure everything is correct. Once all the images have been painted and the backgrounds have been painted either in the computer or traditionally on card and scanned into the system, then all of this information has to come together. What we're going to do now is do some compositing. So I want to bring in the elements that create our scene. So first of all we have a background. Now this is being shown at a lower resolution for speed at the moment. And let's find our character as well. And once we have that there, and of course compositing requires several more elements than this, but the sorts of things that we would now be able to do is to say change the way the camera works with this. So let's set a key frame position for our camera here and then go up to another position, say on another frame, up here somewhere. We can zoom the camera in, for instance. And then when we're happy with the camera move that we've made, we can see how that would actually appear.
Each picture needs around 1 megabyte of storage, and with 25 frames a second, data rates are beyond present telephone networks. Cable communications began with the electric telegraph, originally a messaging network for the early railways. Switching current on the wires powered an electromagnet at the receiver, which moved a magnetized needle. Adding more wires increased the capacity of the system to display information by increasing the number of needles. In 1837, Samuel Morse invented a more efficient system. Current was still switched through a cable, but the information was now carried by the time periods of the switching, the dots and dashes. The telephone itself was invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876 and improved by the adoption of the carbon microphone. Sound pressure waves caused carbon granules in the microphone to change their electrical resistance and thus vary the current in the circuit. The variations in current match the pressure variations of the sound. It's an analog circuit. At the receiver, the current varies the magnetic field in an electromagnet, attracting a metal plate, and thus generating sound pressure waves which match the originating voice. This basic principle was used for around 80 years. Until the 1950s, the telephone signals were carried as analog currents throughout the system. Exchanges were linked by trunk circuits, which by then could carry several dozens of signals at once on coaxial cables. Expensive analog circuits were used to shift signals in frequency so they could be combined onto the trunk cable and later separated. By the 1960s, digital electronics were in use in the telephone exchanges. The analog signal was sampled, and these samples converted to digital information. Multiple sets of pulses could be interleaved on the same cable, more efficiently and reliably than by analog methods. By the 1970s, it was possible to send digital signals as optical pulses along fibre optic cabling. More information could be sent than on copper wires, and at a lower cost. Meanwhile, the growth during the 1980s of personal computers and faxes led to another use of the telephone network, to exchange digital data. Computer modems turned data into signals at audible frequency. Faxes turned scanned information of light and dark areas into audio tones. Yet within the phone system itself, these tones are converted into digital signals, rather a silly way of engineering an information system. Hence the idea of extending the digital connection to us, the consumers, in what's known as the Integrated Services Digital Network, ISDN. Digitization of speech is handled by the phone itself, and faxes and computers don't need intermediate stages. ISDN can offer very high-speed data rates, and thus new information services perhaps, on what's becoming known as a digital superhighway. Competing with this might be other highways. Fibre optic or coaxial cables supplying cable TV could also deliver communication services.
You're all fixed up at your end, are you?
Yes, I'm all connected.
Right, OK. Well, now, you should be able to find the bridge over the river in the centre of Bedford, and that's the River Ouse, and then there's the Market Square and the High Street, and the centre is about there.
Ah, I see. So if I come up here, I can get round and get into here, can I?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
All right. OK, thank you very much indeed then, Graham.
OK, pleasure. See you then.
Okay,
Bye.
see you.
Hello there, William.
The Wren Telecentre in Warwickshire is one of the sites hosting a demonstration video phone computer link. The project is known as Raven. It's designed to bring digital communications to rural areas. As well as a video phone link, the ISDN connection allows people at each end of the conversation to work on a shared file.
For you to have a look at, if you like to have a look at them. And also if you want to make any changes or...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, is that okay? So just bear with me whilst I open it up.
Just coming up now.
Right, William, I'll hand over control to you now.
Okay. I think we should actually make Wren Telecottage in bold.
Okay.
So if we select
Yep.
all of that and make that bold.
Yep. Do you like the font?
Perhaps make it, what other choices do we have?
Tell you what, I'll
Yeah.
do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just move it over. Okay. Save changes. Right, okay, well I think that was useful.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Thanks, Dr. William.
Yep, thanks.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If we've got options such as teleworking, then it allows us, if we change the centre of operations, to keep the work where the people are at the moment.
Chesterfield is the national headquarters for post office counters and the centre for a pilot study in the use of teleworkers.
This is the, if you like, central accounting function for all of post office counters. So imagine I go into a post office and cash my child benefit, I buy postage stamps, tax my car. All of those transactions need to be accounted for somewhere and the data processed as a consequence of those transactions. Everything from the 20,000 post offices in Great Britain comes into this centre, and people are dealing with the data that results from those transactions. So they'll be checking to see how much work was actually done, are the figures correct, is there anything that needs to be corrected, so that we've got complete data for all of the work that's been undertaken at post office counters. So they might be dealing with information straight from the mainframe database that we have, or they could be contacting some postmasters out in the network to confirm the information that's been completed on their accounting documents that they've sent in to us. On this particular site of post office counters, we've got continually expanding work, so we're bringing on new clients, new types of business, and that involves more activity for the people on this site. That puts pressure on an already creaking building. We've got a 1960s building here which is due to be replaced anyway over the next 2 to 3 years, and simply doesn't have space to accommodate any more activity. The local authority wouldn't particularly want us to grow the site in terms of increasing office accommodation in the town centre here in Chesterfield. There's difficulties around car parking and so on. It would cause us tremendous problems in terms of trying to make more space available, as well as simply not getting planning permission to do that from the local authority. We initially looked at the type of work that was suitable to telework, because some activities where individuals need to have constant contact with other members of the team, or they need to have paperwork, files, background and so on available, it's not suitable to telework because they wouldn't have access to that from their homes. So it's about looking at the processes in the first instance, then looking at the people. Who did we have that was, first of all, interested in teleworking, but also trying to match that to some kind of profile for a potential teleworker that says working at home is quite different than working in the office, and do they essentially have the capability to work in fairly isolated surroundings? We then looked at people's homes, because we might have the right process and we might have the right person, but if they don't have the space available that's adequate in their homes to telework, then it would fall at that final hurdle. Once we'd identified the kind of work that people do, we say, well, what do they need? What kit do they need in order to be able to do their job? And so we effectively came up with a spec for each of the teleworkers that says, what do they need? Do they need a PC? Do they need a printer? Do they need fax? Separate telephone links and so on, and came up with the requirements for each of the teleworkers.
I live just on the outskirts of Matlock, which is a town about 8 miles outside of Chesterfield. I used to catch the bus into work every day. Not too bad in the summer, but in winter, if it snowed, you could get stuck in Chesterfield. Some people have got spare bedrooms, which I haven't, but like I got a porch, which was ideal, wasn't being used for anything else, and fits in nicely. I work for the post office, and if postmasters make a mistake on their cash account to what we've processed, the information that I actually get on the screen, I have to phone them up and compare their figures with what's been processed, and then sort it out from there if there's a problem, whether it's addition or whether it's us that's processed it wrong, and then put it right. You still get the same information as what you would get if I was working in Chesterfield in the big office. It's just, instead of being in the big office, I can do that sort of work from home. The post office wanted people for a pilot to see if it would work, and I volunteered. And it's been about 18 months now. It just appealed to me. Basically, because I've got a dog and I didn't like leaving him at home all day. You haven't got the stress of having to get up at a certain time to catch a certain bus, to get to the office, to put certain hours in, and it just appealed to me that you can get up when you want. As long as you get your 37.5 hours in a week, you're pretty flexible. You can work at 10 o'clock at night if you wanted to, and that appealed to me as well. So if you want a couple of hours off in the daytime, you can make it up. I miss the people, but like I've got my own friends and keep in contact on the phone, and we socialise. So office gossip, you don't keep in, you learn it about 3 weeks later than everybody else, but that's about the only thing that I miss. It was a risk, because I wouldn't have wanted to do it if it was the next step for self-employment. That was a bit worrying, but sort of like we had us fears quashed on that one. I'm still going to be employed by the post office, and we had a lot of teething problems, but they were all sorted out. And basically, I think it's a success. I was also worried at the start that you'd have to be very disciplined, especially if it was a nice day that you wouldn't feel like working. But that's not really been hard, I must say. If they pulled out, that's the only reason I'd go back. I don't want to go back.
We established some criteria at the outset of the pilot around things like the productivity levels, things like people's satisfaction with teleworking, sick absence, customer satisfaction, and obviously the cost side of it. And against each of those criteria, we've come out positively. So the teleworkers are happy, they don't want to come back into the office. Our customers perceive no reduced level of service in terms of the work they get from teleworkers. Productivity increased significantly, so there was in the first 6 months a 50% increase in productivity from teleworkers, and although that reduced over time, there is still a significant improvement. Sick absence reduced significantly in comparison with those people in the office. So against all the criteria we established, there was a tick for teleworking. Post Office Counters is a relatively traditional organisation, although we've been involved in things like total quality management for quite some time. Middle managers essentially are used to being able to see the people that they manage. So they have to adopt a different style in terms of saying, well, how do I measure people's performance? Is it about whether I can actually see them in the office, or is it about something different? So we had to make sure that measurement criteria were established that allowed managers to be comfortable with the fact that even though one of their team wasn't at work between 2 and 3, they'd actually delivered all of their outputs, and that was measurable, and so that they could establish whether or not they were performing. One of the biggest difficulties that potentially can come up with teleworkers is around communication. The importance of making sure that the teleworkers still feel that they're in contact with everything that goes on in the office, as well as their colleagues and other teleworkers, is absolutely fundamental. I mean, we can't underestimate the importance of getting that sort of thing right. So making sure that they've got things like email available to them, where anything that goes out to any member of staff here automatically goes out to the teleworker at the same time. So they're not finding out late, neither are they finding out early, they're finding things out at the same time as people here. Making sure that there are opportunities for team activities so that they get together, the teleworkers as a group, but also get together with people in the office has been quite key. Because there are issues, no doubt, around teleworkers versus office workers. A perception that yes, teleworkers have been treated slightly differently and perhaps are a little bit more special than people in the office. What we've decided is that teleworking is one of the approaches that we'll adopt as a business in terms of offering more flexibility to employees in terms of the way that they work. What we need to do is put something in place to make sure that that's deployed consistently throughout the business, so that if somebody wants to telework in the north of Scotland, then similar sort of rules apply to somebody that wants to telework in Chesterfield or in central London. So at the moment, I'm working along with human resources in post office counters to come up with an approach that says this is how we will deploy teleworking in the business, because it will continue to give us all of the benefits that we've identified so far.
When Brunel built his Great Western Railway from London to Bristol, the village of Swindon at the midpoint was the obvious site for his engineering works, and thus the modern town was born. The railway works have all but gone now, but there's a town of 190,000 who are probably unaware of the fact that their mix of age, class and employment is a close match to the UK average. Add to this happy coincidence the existence of a modern communication network in the town, and Swindon became first choice for a 20th century communications experiment, electronic cash. In June 1995, a pilot scheme was launched to the world's press by the Midland and NatWest banks, who formed the Mondex partnership. The basic idea is to store money electronically on a memory chip inside a plastic card.
Like many other people around the world, we've not made a lot of progress. And suddenly we had a very good idea, and 5 years and 4 months later, here we are, launching it in Swindon. There's been an enormous amount of work done by thousands of people all over the world, people in Europe, in the Far East, in North America. And for us, there were two key issues. The first one, very simply, was whether people would accept the idea of electronic cash. The second issue was whether there were sound commercial reasons why NatWest should commit time, money, resources to the development of a...
The launch achieved media coverage across the world. Here's what local TV made of it.
The Mondex card is the shopper's equivalent of the phone card, storing money on a microchip transferred from a bank account.
Decided what you want then?
I want this.
Do you have enough?
I've
money?
got £10. I think. Yeah, I've got £10.
Oh, good.
8-year-old Nicola Lowe no longer needs a piggy bank. Instead, she gets her pocket money put onto her own Mondex card.
I feel that it's nice to have a card like Mum and Daddy.
Hundreds of retailers in Swindon have been using their Mondex terminals for the first time today. They welcome the security the card provides.
Cuts down on bureaucracy, and it saves time when we bank the cash. Rather than having to physically bank the cash, we can do it electronically.
In the great smart card gamble, there are still some places where only hard cash will do. But Mondex is hoping eventually to hit the jackpot. Adrienne Rosen, BBC News West, Swindon.
The crowning point of the day's media events was probably the most unconvincing ever street sale of a newspaper. But it duly made headlines the next day as the world's first electronic cash transaction. Spokesmen for the Mondex company were keen to stress what they saw as the unarguable benefits of a new system of money.
We all love cash. I mean, we all use cash from day to day. I mean, it is something which we've grown up with, and of course we're all familiar with. But the reality is that as we move into the electronic age, it's rather like moving from barter to coin, and from coin to notes. We think we're at the stage, and our customers are telling us we're at the stage now to make that big, further technology leap from notes to electronic money.
So who better than a local group of Open University students who'd just worked through living with technology to investigate? In the time available, it wouldn't be a matter of deciding whether or not Mondex would be a commercial success, but of raising the issues that a full-scale technology assessment would be expected to cover.
Sounds fine. Okay.
We asked our group how they'd go about using the course's approach to assess the Mondex card. Their initial briefing came from video of the press launch and other publicity material from the company.
Some details on why they've actually chosen Swindon as the client.
The main question to ask is who gains, who loses? In other words, which groups might form the interested parties?
It doesn't mention the wallet, but then that's not what people get normally, is it? Yeah, you don't have to send somebody to the bank with all the cash, I suppose.
After the first discussion, the team decided to focus on 3 interest groups they'd identified: the Mondex company itself, retailers and consumers. The first visit was to the Mondex demonstration centre to hear just what the technical capabilities of the card were.
Here we've got 3 of the main parts of the Mondex service. We've got the card, the balance reader and the Mondex wallet. The card itself is in appearance like a normal plastic card, a credit card or a debit card, but as well as having the magnetic stripe on the back, it also contains a chip. That's what makes it a smart card. That's a small microprocessor which allows the card to undertake a lot more complicated functions. It has substantially more memory than can ever be contained in a magnetic stripe. The value on the card can be locked. You select a 4-digit number which you can change as often as you want through a number of devices, including the cash dispenser or the public payphone. And when the card's locked, all you can see is the balance using the balance reader. You simply insert the card and it shows you the balance. The card itself remembers the last 10 transactions that you've undertaken, and it shows you whether it was a debit or a credit and where you actually spent the money or received the money from. The easiest way for the consumer to see them is to have a Mondex wallet. You can see that the last thing that I did was a debit of £3.58 on my card. If we press the statement button again, you can see that this time it was £23.42, and you can see there that that was at the Texaco petrol station. Well, if we just take our card back out again for a moment, inside the wallet there's another smart card chip. That has all the same benefits as the chip that's actually on the full-size card.
It's worth asking yourself what this means for the smart chip in the card. There has to be memory to store the value, the ability to read and write to this memory to communicate with other cards, and processing ability to make communication and storage secure by encrypting and decrypting information. Communication needn't be confined to the wallet or the store terminal.
So this is how we're going to get money from the bank. And we're also going to use Mondex to pay for the call. As you can see, we've got a Mondex option on the screen. We're going to select the payment function. It's only going to be a very short call, so we'll put the 20p across, dial the bank. That's the number on this card. Now the Mondex service is driven across the screen, and you can also hear it on the phone. I will put some on the card. Now because I'm taking money out of my account, I have to put my 4-digit code number in. Asks me how much I want. Well, we'll take £30 out of my account.
The next interest group to be considered was the retailers, and Judith visited one of the local supermarkets who joined the Mondex trial. As we were to discover, the modern supermarket already houses considerable amounts of information technology in the network-linked system of cash registers.
How many tills do you actually have? We've actually got 33 main checkout bank tills. We've got our customer service desks and our record bar, our petrol stations and our restaurant. They can all take cheques, cash, Mondex. We're geared up for all of it. We can process refunds. There's a complete audit trail completely through all the checkouts.
And it goes off to a main computer, does it?
Yes, it does. And also, we're going to be looking forward to the future that as items are scanned through the checkouts, they will automatically be reordered, so we won't have to be doing the reordering process that we do now.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the equipment you've got here?
Yeah, what we've actually got here is we've got the Mondex terminal, which is linked directly through to our checkout keyboard here. Inside the Mondex terminal is a card that has a chip which retains all the information. Once the customer's card for the transaction is placed in the slot, the information is retained then onto the chip inside the terminal itself. The receipt is then given directly from our checkout, as in the normal way, yes.
What exactly are the pros and cons for a retailer, or from a retailer's point of view, for taking cash and cheques?
Well, with cash, it's guaranteed. We've actually got the money financially there. There's a lot of work involved in actually banking it, counting it, balancing it, and getting it to the bank. And also, I suppose the cons of it are the actual security of it being in the drawers, the transactions that have to be placed to get it to the bank. But then again, like I say, it's guaranteed. It is ours.
And what about credit and debit cards? Do they have different possibilities and problems?
They're used a lot now, especially the debit cards. The main problems that we have with those is when we get the stolen ones, the money's not as guaranteed as you seem to think it is.
But credit cards and debit cards are seen almost as electronic money. How does Mondex differ from both cash and from credit cards?
The security of it's a lot easier. There's less cash in the checkouts. It's a lot easier to process. We just take up the cards each night and put the financial cash straight down in telephone lines straight into our bank account the next morning. With Mondex, if the money's on the card, it's there instant for us to use. So if a person's got £1,000 on his Mondex card, we can take that as a transaction because it's guaranteed cash.
We also took the opportunity to do some market research of our own.
I can't see much point. I've got a switch card which I use for most of my shopping, and I have a checkbook which I use when necessary, but I can't really see any point in getting one. I've got credit cards too, because you've got to have the money in the account to start with, haven't you? So I don't see the advantage of a switch card.
I think it's just going to take a little time before it sort of catches on with everybody.
I have several credit cards anyway, which I'm used to using, have accounts with them, and also I prefer to use cash for casual purposes.
Don't even know what it is.
Well, basically, I think it's going to be convenient when you have the local shops and such, when you get sort of papers and things like that from that one. You know, when you want to go to the shop and just get something for maybe £1, £2, £3 from that one.
I've got enough cards. I tend to use my switch or most of the cash. I mean, we did think about it, but I just never. I'm not working there. If I'd been working, I think I would have.
No, I've never heard of it. No.
I'm not, one for sort of credit. I'm really a cash person, actually.
Most of Swindon are actually taking it now. I've noticed that, which I suppose we should really support the retailers, and that I haven't.
Well, I prefer cash, yes. I mean, obviously I haven't tried Mondex yet. I mean, it sounds a good idea, but I just didn't like the thought of paying for the privilege each month.
Have you got any money to put on it?
You know where you're spending it if you've got it in your pocket.
Well, I don't think I can do anything with it, what I can't do without it now. So.
I don't know, I'll probably lose the card knowing me or something like that.
Not the most scientific of surveys, but the general feeling seemed to be that the advantages of electronic transactions were mostly with the retailer.
Hello, is that the Consumer Association?
For a more objective view of possible consumer implications, the group consulted the Consumer Association. They hadn't done any work specific to Mondex, but had developed some more general points of concern to do with electronic purchases, especially by phone. How secure would confidential data, such as credit card numbers, be? What was the cost of the transaction, and who would bear it? If there were no receipt issued on a long-distance transaction, would that affect consumer rights? If an electronic transaction was judged to be a cash sale, not a credit card sale, some consumer rights would also be affected. The last group to be visited was the central office of the Mondex partners. Mondex began as a partnership between two banks, the Midland and the NatWest. But to be a commercial success, other strategic partners were needed from the electronic and the communications industries. Obviously, the initial position of the new company was to analyse the likely commercial success of the technology.
How does Mondex perceive the worldwide market?
For Mondex,
The market for the product is actually everybody in the world. So that means children as well as adults, old people as well as young, and in every type of society. So the very high technology of Japan, but also the low technology perhaps of China or India. The product can work in all of those environments, but it will work differently. And again, one of the things we've got to do is find out how those people in different countries want to treat the product and make sure that it's got the technology infrastructure to support what they want to do.
What would you say are the benefits to the user?
Developing something like electronic cash has a huge range of different benefits in different societies. So for example, on the west coast of the States, where people are talking about doing business over the internet, Mondex electronic cash actually enables that to happen. So that's a huge benefit for those people. But for perhaps a child in Japan who's not that interested in the internet, but wants to play computer games down the telephone line, that's what Mondex is. It's a way of paying for his electronic entertainment. It's electronic cash for an electronic era. And then there's me back at home in the pub. It's a great way of paying for a pint.
And how does it benefit the banks and the retailers?
The place where we started was very much with the major banks and the major retailers. So they're the people who actually have enough of an understanding of technologies to be able to enter a proper dialogue. And that helped us flesh out an awful lot of aspects to the product. Once we got those fleshed out, we then did visit the smaller guys, the chap who sells you your vegetables on the street market. They're part of the economy too, they're part of the cash economy too, and if our product didn't meet their needs, it wouldn't be as good as money. So then we had meetings with those people. Again, it's very much on a sort of random sampling basis, but very in-depth interviews, trying to find out not just what people do with money, but really what lies behind what they do with money.
At their next meeting, the group reviewed what each of them had learned from their research.
What was on the card, what sort of capabilities it had, and he said that you got a basic package of the card and a key fob. This is what every user gets. He also said that the chip in the card was only half used, so it's actually got quite a lot of memory left on it, which perhaps in the future could be used for like loyalty schemes, or he even said things like medical details, but they haven't decided on anything like that. But there is like quite a lot of capability left on the card.
Do they make a charge for doing that when you use the BT phone? Do you have to pay to actually load your money up?
You have to pay to make the phone call, but I don't think you're charged any bank charges for doing it.
It's just a standard phone call rate.
Yeah, that's right. And you obviously use your card to make the phone call as well, so you don't need any change.
That's quite handy.
Well, I went to see David Morton from Mondex at Throgmorton Avenue, and he gave me some sort of information about the future benefits, what they could be.
Well, I went down to Asda and spoke to Debbie Vickery, who's one of the managers there, and really, they don't have any great disadvantages using the Mondex, apart from the installation of the hardware. If it doesn't get used, then obviously it's going to cost them an awful lot. But there's quite a lot of advantages for them, because it's actually cheaper to bank electronic money than it is to spend all the time counting normal cash and cheques. And also the security is a lot better, because they don't get caught out with fraud for cheques and they don't get caught out with fraud for credit cards. If they get a Mondex card, it's guaranteed cash.
Did they actually say how much they were charged for installing the hardware?
No, they didn't, but the actual hardware itself really only had to be built on the existing system, because they've got things to cover switch cards and credit cards anyway, so it wouldn't have been like starting from scratch. But they didn't actually go into the actual figures.
And of course Mondex, they're putting the product forward. They want to make it appealing enough for people to use. They obviously want to make money themselves, but I don't know who else is benefiting from it. I mean, who's going to pay for it all?
Well, I think the users will be paying for it mostly, because they're going to have to pay so much a month to use it. Most of the people I've spoken to don't seem very happy about having to pay to use it, but I think it's very useful for things like car parks, and in the future they're thinking about bringing it in on the buses, which means you won't have to carry a lot of loose change about with you.
I think after we've done all our research, I think we have actually identified the 3 user groups that we thought we would. I think what we would go on to now is thinking about what each individual group's values are.
Maybe list down the advantages and disadvantages for the consumer and for the retailers, the user groups that we'd identified, really.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, because it's not so much whether the technology works, it's how it's perceived, the values of the people actually involved, particularly the customer. I went to see Debbie.
One way of representing the various groups and their interconnections is diagrammatically. In simple terms, this would begin with areas to represent each of the groups and lines connecting them to show the interactions. More formal methods, such as spray diagrams or multiple cause diagrams, can be used to help analyse the interaction. Of course, the partners in the Mondex group, through the pilot scheme in Swindon, were running a similar exercise, but for real.
A bank is about giving a service to a customer. It's about meeting a customer's needs and, clearly from the point of view of our own existence, maintaining our income levels in a way that we can continue to do business and grow. So Mondex is another means of providing a service which we believe customers want, which the research says they want, and we're about finding out whether or not they'll that the economics of the provision of that service are such that we can continue to do it.
But how necessary was it to run a pilot scheme?
The beauty of the Swindon experience for us is that we will get an awful lot of very hard, analysable information. We will have real experience with real people and real businesses, and we can see where in reality people do spend the money. We will ask businesses what you felt about it. Could we improve it? What can we do to make it better? And as a consequence of that detailed work, then we will be able to plan the most effective way in which we can roll Mondex out in a way that meets those customers' needs, meets those retailers' needs, and of course meets our needs.
Further links for T102 students. 2 years on found us back on the streets of Swindon, recording this month's audio cassette, which contains an update on the Mondex scheme. And don't forget to visit the TV Extra zone in the online campus, where there's background information for all the TV programmes.